Let's get up to speed on kubectl. The first thing you want to do when working with kubectl is make sure you're using the correct context. And in order to do that, you should kubectl config get contexts. This will show you all the contexts for all the clusters you can interact with, and you decide if the current one is the one you want to work with. In my case, that's it, but if I wanted to change that, you can do it using the kubectl config use context command and chugging in the context name at the end, like this. For me, nothing changed because it was the same one, but for you, it might make a difference. Now, let's get all the namespaces in the cluster. And as you can see here, I have two commands. Both of them yield the same result because ns is a shortcut for namespaces. So you will see all the namespaces in the cluster. Then let's create a deployment in the default namespace. And as you can see here, the command is kubectl create deployment, the name of the deployment and the image, and it was created. Let's look at it, but this time you will notice that instead of deployment, I wrote the short, which is deploy, kubectl get deploy, and it yields the result of the deployment we just created. And then we can delete it using the kubectl delete deploy command. And there we go. We're all clear now. But mainly when you work with kubectl and Kubernetes resources, you would like to deploy complex stuff, and usually it's best if you have that stored in a YAML file or something of sorts. So let's apply a deployment coming from a YAML file, and this is the command kubectl apply -f and then the path to that YAML file, and at the end I also told it to deploy in a certain namespace. So let's look at what we created. This is how it looks like, and we can also delete it using this command right here. Okay, now because I'm tired of using kubectl, I want to create an alias for it. You have the command here for bash. I'm in Windows, I'm using PowerShell, so I'll use this one instead, which is Set-Alias. Every time I type in K, it'll actually be kubectl, or short for kubectl. So it looks like this. Now let's apply the deployment file one more time because we will work with it. Now let's see the full deployment file as a YAML, and this is how you can actually get all the fields from Kubernetes, even the Kubernetes managed one like status, where you see the last transition time, last update time, and stuff I didn't actually declare in my initial deployment.yml file. Let's look at all of the pods in the namespace, and you can see we have 4 at the moment. Let's look at the image used by our deployment. So you can do kubectl get deploy, and then using the output of JSON path, you can actually take out sub properties of the deployment object. In our case, it's the image that we're using. So let's look at that. And as you can see, our deployment is using the nginx-1.14.2 image. Now let's change that image, shall we? So kset image of the deployment in this namespace, and this is the name of the container we are changing the image for. When we do this, deployment has been updated. So let's look at the image used by the deployment one more time. And right now you will see it's no longer nginx, it's busybox latest, but I'm not happy with this either. So let's do a change to nginx latest now. So let's check the image again. And now you see we are on nginx latest, and this looks good. So let's look out at the rollout history of our deployment. And as you can see, we changed it 2 times. Yeah, so initially we deployed it, and then we updated it to the busybox latest image, and then we updated it to the nginx latest image on the 3rd revision. So what if we wanted to turn back in time and go back to, let's say, revision 2? Well, we have this command here, kubectl rollout undo for this deployment in this namespace to this certain revision. Let's run it, and lo and behold, we have rolled back. How can we check that? Well, we look at the image, and as you can see, we are back on the image being busybox latest. Again, we don't want that, so let's go back to nginx and move forward. Now, let's get all the pods in all of the namespaces. And as you can see here, there are 2 ways you can write this. The lazy way is with -A at the end, which also is equal to -- all minus namespaces. And this will yield all the pods in your cluster. Now let's get specific property of the pod. So by doing this, we get the names. Yeah, so we're getting items, metadata, name for all the pods in the Shikki namespace. And in our case, you see we have 4 pods right here. Okay. Now let's edit an existing object. In our case, it's going to be a pod. So I'm just going to take the name of this last random pod and chug it in here. Let's run, and lo and behold, we got the pod YAML file open in our default editor. In my case, it's Notepad. So I can go here and I can, for example, add a random label. And I can actually Control S to save, close this, and it will say that the pod was edited. So this is very useful when you want to play around with certain resources. Now let's also connect to the nginx server which is running on our pod, and you can do this for troubleshooting using kubectl port forward. In my case, I'm port forwarding to the whole deployment on port 80. This is the container port, and this will be my local port 7070. So let's run this, and as you can see, it's forwarding from. So if I was to open a tab here and do localhost, you'll see welcome to nginx, and you'll also see in here it says handling connection. Now let's patch our deployment. You can do Control C to end the port forwarding. So let's look at our deployment again. Yeah, kubectl get deploy namespace Shikki output YAML. And if we look here at the deployment, you'll see that we have metadata, labels, and only one label called app nginx. Okay, so if I'm going to run this, which is a kubectl patch with the remove command, and I'm going to remove metadata labels app, deployment was patched. And if I run my get deploy command, you'll see that metadata no longer has labels under it. Yeah, so I deleted the label. But what if I wanted to add something back, a label back? Well, I can use the same kubectl patch deploy command, but the operation this time is add, and on metadata labels, I'm adding a new label called A with value B. So let's get this running. Deployment was patched. Let's get deployment with YAML output, and you can see here under metadata we now have labels and A, B. Hope this helps you being a rock star at kubectl.